Moccasin Trail, Chapter 6. It was Jim who roused first in the chilly, drizzling daybreak. 2 mornings later, he came instantly wide awake all over, as he always did, and from long habit glanced first at his rifle, then at his horse. Both were safe. Then he looked toward the river. Today they would start through the gorge. He got up and walked to the end of the wagon, stroking Buckskin's beautiful arched neck and gazing thoughtfully into the gorge. He'd traversed it once, last summer, in a good canoe. It was bad enough even then, 50 miles of the roughest, most treacherous river he'd ever laid eyes on, full of rapids and tearing currents, winding, bending, boiling, crammed with submerged obstacles, any one of which could rip your raft and you wide open. But the walls of the mountains that had crowded the mighty Columbia into this narrow space rose sheer and black from the water's depths. For wagons, there was no other possible entry into the valley between here and California. His eyes moved from the river to the heights above, toward which he and Daniel would soon be starting with the animals. That would be a new trail to him. He and Tom had crossed south of Mount Hood, and if this was anything like that. 2 nights ago, Rutledge and his son Ned had appeared after supper, and the 6 of them had made what plans they could for a journey that would last. That was at best a wild gamble. They would build a large raft, enough for both families. But what about the animals? Hire these engines around here to drive them over the mountain, and you'd turn up missing a few head of them over them. Hire these engines here to drive them over the mountain, and you turned up missing a few head, say about half. But you couldn't take the critters on a raft. I'll take 'em over, Jim had spoken up. They'd all looked at him with a mixture of hope and doubt. That trail, Rutledge said, I heard it ain't wuth a name. It's winter up yonder, boy. I reckon I can get 'em through, and I'll take Dan'l to help out. That'll leave you, Johnny, and Ned to pull the raft. It was the only way out, and they'd decided on it. The raft was built and ready now. They'd worked all day yesterday cutting small trees and lashing them together. The remaining problem was food. Jim turned away from the river and moved silently to his pack. The prime pelt he had captured and rough dressed last week on the Powder River had sunned on its willow hoop all the way to Dallas, and now lay folded with the others among his possibles. Shielding it with his body from the light rain, he shook it out and examined it carefully for signs of dampness, almost surprised that it looked so fresh. It seemed years since that morning he said goodbye to Tom. He wrapped it in a piece of buffalo rope and tucked it under his arm. It galled him to spend good beaver just for food, but this meat was gone now, and there was no time to hunt. Winter was already breathing down their necks. Summoning Moki with a soft guttural, he started for the Indian lodges that fringed the settlement. These Chinooks up here must have something more sensible than potatoes. When he returned half an hour later, Jonathan was up, padding awkwardly around about the fetal remnants of last night's fire in Jim's other moccasins, which since yesterday had replaced the blanket bandages. Jim watched him and shook his head. Johnny had a good deal to learn about walking in moccasins. And about staying alive, thought Jim as he came closer and closer unnoticed. When he was almost on top of his brother, he let out a piercing war whoop, then grinned at Jonathan's dash toward the wagon and his rifle. It's only me, he drawled. Johnny whirled, then sagged against the wagon's tailpiece. Lord Almighty, your idea of a joke? By gor, it wouldn't have been much a joke for you if I'd have been a cayuse, Jim retorted. I would have tucked your hair twice over. You better learn to keep your eyes skinned. As Johnny shrugged and started back to the fire, he added, Say, why you walking that-a-way? Jonathan turned a face like a thundercloud. These moccasins, troublesomest things I ever had on. Jim relented. Ain't you ever taken no notice of Injun's footprints, Johnny? Footprints? No. It might come in handy right now if you was to notice mine. He walked across a stretch of thin mud to make it easy. But Jonathan only stared blankly at the tracks until Jim made him put a row of his own right beside them. "By golly," Johnny said, "you're pigeon-toed. And yours ain't. Now do you get it? You talk like I was half-witted. I reckon you mean I should start toeing in." "You reckon right. By golly, the things a feller's got to do to get along in this country." Jim grinned and stooped beside his sack, took out his knife and loosened the thongs and that sewed up the top of the parfletch together. "What's that?" inquired Jonathan. "Pemmican. That's a new one on me. You've eat jerky, ain't you? You mean that dried buffalo meat? Lord, yes, we lived on that once we left the plains." "Well, this here's jerky, only they pound it up all fine and pack it in a parfletch and pour melted fat over. This stuff's got body to it. Sticks to your ribs." "Well, I swear. How'd you cook it?" Jim shrugged. "Any old way you want. Fry it, roast it, boil it, or just dig out a hunk and start chewing." "That'll likely be it. If this rain keeps up, we can't make no fire. Think that bagful'll last us through the gorge?" Again, Jim shrugged. "You gotta make it last. Weather'll hold all right enough, or else get worse." Sally and Dan'l appeared a moment later, and with only one doubtful sniff at the contents of the bag, Sally produced her skillet and started following directions without protest. Maybe she'd be thinking things over. Jim smiled to himself as he remembered her reactions of last night, when they'd been eating the last of the haunch. He'd remarked with enjoyment that panther meat knocked the hind sights off of every other kind, even buffalo. Sally's eyes had flown wide open. The bite halfway to her mouth ended up in the fire. "Panther? Is that what this is? Why, I'd sooner eat cat or dog." And when Jim had inquired what was wrong with dog, she acted as if he'd said something revolting. Johnny'd taken it as a huge joke, but to a mountain man it wasn't funny. "Meat's meat," Jim told them flatly. "You'll find out if you ever get hungry enough." It wasn't unlikely they'd find it out before they reached Fort Vancouver, he thought now, as he walked down to where his animals were tethered. At Sally's summons to breakfast, he merely grunted, "I've eat already." No sense using any more of that pemmican than necessary. Before they even started, hunger was nothing new in his life, and he was in far better shape than the others to begin with. He could live off short rations and reserve his strength for a good long while, and off the parfletch soles of his moccasins after that, if need be. He'd done it before. He wondered with a flicker of amusement what Sally would think of boiled moccasin for dinner. Blech. By the time he divided his pack into 2 loads, one for Buckskin and the other for the mule, the others had finished eating. As he started back around the wagon, they were standing there together, Johnny kicking dirt over the fire, Sally scrubbing at the skillet with a bunch of leaves and talking in a low, emphatic voice, Dan'l looking from one face to the other. "Just wished there was some other way," Sally was saying. I don't see how I can get on that old raft and just go off and leave him. Oh, Johnny, can't we find another way?" "Sis, I don't see how. I don't think I ain't racked my brain. I feel the same as you, but it'll take Mr. Rutledge and Ned and me all 3 to manage that raft, and the cattle's no one-man job." "Aw, shucks." Dan'l's voice sounded disgusted. "You talk like I was a baby. Jim'll be with me anyhow." "That's half what I'm worried about," snapped Sally. She dropped the skillet and grabbed the boy by the shoulders. "Don't you listen to that Injun talk of his, you hear me? Don't you—" She broke off and gave her head a quick little shake, and suddenly pulled Dan'l into her and hugged him with all her might. "Sis," said Jonathan. He turned her gently and put the skillet in her hands, giving her an awkward pat. "Go on now and finish stowing things away. Ain't no good to think too much." As she started for the wagon, wiping her eyes fiercely on a corner of her apron, He turned to the little boy. We ain't thinking you're a baby. It's just, criminy, be careful, Dan, will you? Aw, cracky, Johnny. There ain't nothing to... Why, this ain't... The swagger drained out of Dan'l. In a small voice, he finished, Yeah, sure, Johnny. I'll be careful. All right. Johnny straightened, wiping his palms on his thighs. You'll be fine. Safe as church, probably. Go on and help Sis pack. He turned away swiftly and kicked a last covering of dirt over the coals, while Jim watched grimly. Easy to see how much they trusted him. When he stepped at last out of the shelter of the wagon, Johnny snapped almost angrily, Come on, let's get this wagon to the river. Next couple hours were furiously busy. At the riverbank, they were joined by Bob Rutledge and his son Ned, a lanky, freckle-faced boy with big hands and his father's warm smile. Together, the four dismantled both wagons and loaded them onto the raft, along with a mountain of household goods. Jim wondered what anyone could want with all that foorara. Crowds of other immigrants up and down the river's edge were loading up too, and every few minutes one of the clumsy craft would push out into the water to start its long, perilous journey through the gorge. The weather grew steadily worse, huge, slushy snowflakes alternating with the chilling rain. Oh, sounds cold. Mr. Rutledge glared up at the sky as the last boxes were made fast. Criminy, maybe we better hold off a day or two. Wait for better weather. Wait for better weather and you'll be here till spring, Jim said bluntly. Rutledge sighed and nodded and sent Ned to the post after his wife, his twin daughters, and Sally. Jim eyed the twins curiously as they scrambled down the rocky bank in the wake of the large, comfortable, breathless woman with pink cheeks who must be Mrs. Rutledge. They were sturdily built 14-year-olds with their father's red hair. Bess, neat and timid, Maggie, mussed and talkative. Under cover of her chatter, Johnny turned anxiously to Dan'l. Now keep wrapped up good, you hear? As Sally rushed over to hug the boy once more, Johnny faced Jim with a look like a threat. But all he said was, Take care of that young'un. You mind that raft, Jim flung at him. I'll handle my end. Yeah, said Johnny slowly. A grin flickered over his face and was gone. Guess we'll both have our hands full. We'll meet you at the Cascades. He turned abruptly and leaped aboard the raft. Weighted down with people and possessions, it was already awash. But Rutledge settled the womenfolk in a crude shelter formed by the baggage and wagon top, and shouted to Ned and Jonathan to look sharp. All three grasped their poles and braced themselves, and with Jim and Dan'l shoving and straining on the bank, the unwieldy craft began to shudder free. Oh, Dan'l! Goodbye, Dan'l! Goodbye, honey! Cried Sally. Oh, Johnny, what are we doing? We can't leave him here. But at that moment, the roaring current caught the raft at last and swung it free. Immediately it was bobbing and twisting down the dark river, and a moment later had careened around a rocky point and vanished. Cracky, gulped Dan'l, and Jim, glancing down at him, saw the near panic on his face. They went awful fast, didn't they? One moment they was here with us, and the next... He broke off, his lower lip shaking uncontrollably. We ain't hanging round here either, said Jim. Come on. But what if we never see him again? And what if we don't get there? Jim grabbed the boy by his shoulders hard. For a moment, the desperate loneliness of the small figure and its bunchy wraps filled him with pity. But he kept his voice rough. I'll get you there, understand? I'll get you there. He waited only until the panic had faded from the boy's face, then turned him firmly away from the raging waters and toward the campsite, where Buckskin and the mule waited among the milling stock. One strong swing, and Dan'l was on Bad Medicine's back, atop the divided pack, before the beast had time to get temperamental. Calling Moki to stand guard beside the mule, Jim set about convincing the indignant Buckskin that she was going to carry the other half of the pack, and him too, whether she liked it or not. Eventually, the new order of things was accepted by both animals, and they were starting up the slope toward the snowy heights, 2,000 feet above the gorge. Ahead of them wandered 4 skinny oxen, 2 cows, and a heifer, Rutledge's saddle horse, and a furiously busy Moki. "Jim, do you think they'd make it through the rapids on that big old raft?" came Daniel's small voice. "Do you think they'll get there, Jim? I never even said goodbye to Sis." "You'll be saying hello to her afore long. Shut up now, we got a mountain to climb." Daniel said no more, and presently both were too occupied with the problems of bewildered cattle, steep and slippery footings, and their own discomfort to talk had they wanted to. Before noon it was snowing in earnest. The afternoon was a steady climb through a world they could not see for the swirling flakes. The wind howled constantly at their backs. The cattle, bawling their protests, kept floundering off the incredibly rough trail. "Say, you reckon we can get those critters through here?" shouted Daniel at one point, after they had struggled half an hour to free one of the oxen from a drift. "Stop jawing and pull," grunted Jim. He tightened his knees about Buckskin's shivering sides and hauled once again on the animal's lead rope, putting all the rawhide strength of his shoulders and back into the pole. This time, with bad medicine and Daniel straining on the other rope, the beast scrambled free. "There, you ornery, moth-eaten old piece of cussedness, you," panted Jim, yanking the ropes loose. "Get off the trail once more, and I'll leave you to freeze solid." He pulled the hood of the grizzly cloak up over his head and fastened it with his fingers, stiff from cold, narrowing his eyes to slits as he faced once more into the wind. Freezing solid would be no trick at all this winter. It snowed steadily for 5 days of the struggle. By noon of the 6th, the storm let up enough for them to see the treetops, and an hour or so later, the storm stopped entirely. But the skies did not clear. They made camp that night in the dubious shelter of an overhanging rock ledge, wrapping themselves cocoon-like in buffalo robes, huddling close to the animals and each other. Jim gave Daniel a portion of the pemmican he had kept out of the bigger sack, but contented himself with a few handfuls of snow, as he had done every second night so far. There was no way of telling yet how long the crossing would take, and how much colder it would get. Better make this food stretch as far as possible. He tightened his belt and thrust his hands into the warmth of his armpits. It was a bleak enough scene, framed by the rock ledge, trees weighted with snow, the dark shapes of the cattle huddling with their backs to the wind, a little stream running black and vividly and wickedly cold through a white world. "Jim?" "Huh?" "Can I ask you something?" With an effort, Jim got his mind off a fire and a hot meal. "Yeah, sure." "Well," Daniel clenched his teeth to stop their chattering and spoke jerkily through them, "that grizzly you killed that time when you was only my age, how'd you kill him, Jim?" "Oh, that? Why, I strangled him." "Cracky." Daniel shot upright, jaw agape. "With my bare hands," Jim added. Slowly a grin spread over Daniel's wind-chapped face. "You're foxing me. What happened, honest?" "Put a little lead in his brain, that's all." "Was it a big un?" Jim indicated the silver-tipped cloak with the bob of his head. "That big." "Cracky. Wasn't anybody there to help you?" "I'll say there weren't. I was the only one fool enough to light out upwind." Daniel pondered this a minute, then stirred and sighed. What do you wear that feather for, Jim?" "'Cause I risked my neck getting it. Means I've counted coup." "How do you count coup?" "Oh, they's quite a few ways. You hit an enemy with a squirt, with a quirt, or your coup stick afore you've hurt him, while he's still armed to the teeth, or you touch the first one kilt in battle, or steal a horse some risky way." All at once, the old life was all around him, blotting out this world of snow and darkening skies, Involuntarily, his fingers crept underneath his cloak to touch the necklace lying warm against his throat. "Are you an Injun now, Jim?" Daniel's voice came out softly out of the gloom. "Sally says you are." The necklace seemed to lose its warmth. Jim stirred impatiently. He wasn't going to fret about what Sally and Johnny thought. "Jim," Daniel said dreamily, "I don't care if you're an Injun. I wished I'd killed a grizzly. I wished I was just like you." "Wah, you don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, I do." Jim turned. The boy was watching him solemnly, his eyes clear and earnest in his shadowed face. A deep comfort stole over Jim. "Johnny wouldn't like that," he said softly. "Now shut up and go to sleep." But for a long time, after Daniel's breathing was quiet and steady, Jim lay there wakeful, thinking of the vicious river far below him, of the raft and its occupants. And when he woke up in the gray dawn, Johnny was still on his mind. In the same dawn, miles away, Jonathan uncurled his stiff muscles and sat up, peering about him through the dim light. Sally was still sleeping there at the other end of the wagon bed, on her lumpy arrangement of boxes and soggy bedclothes, looking as uncomfortable as he felt. Through the arch of the wagon top, he could see Rutledge moving outside. "Wake up, sis," he muttered. "Time to get started." He edged his way out of the cramped interior of the wagon, feeling weary, dirty, and cold as death. It was raining again, of course. It had rained every minute it was not snowing, this whole 6 days. And each day the river seemed to grow more treacherous, the beating wind stronger, their progress slower, and their condition more desperate. Sally's feet were so swollen she could no longer wear her sodden shoes. Ned Rutledge's boots had disintegrated altogether from the constant soakings, as had his father's and Maggie's, which they stumbled about in wrappings of old rags. Bess, the other twin, had been ill. 50 miles of this, thought Jonathan. Wonder how many of 'em we'd covered by now. Not many, with that wind all is beating us back. Lord, how I wish we was through with this blasted gorge. He stepped down reluctantly over the wagon's tailpiece into the 2 inches of water that covered the logs of the raft. Oof. It would be awash ankle deep as soon as they cast off and pushed into the current, he knew. Only the trick of resting the wagon boxes on top of the dismantled wheels had kept their beds from being flooded instead of merely sodden. Flexing his sore shoulders, he waded towards Rutledge. How do we do this? How do we know this ain't yesterday?" he inquired. "Or the day before, or the day before that? Same rain and wind, same nasty-looking rapids up ahead, same fine, level campsite." He jerked his head towards the tumbled black boulders that constituted the bank, around one of which strained their anchoring rope. "Well, I got muscles I didn't know about yesterday," grunted Rutledge. "Seems like the same old ordinary ones I've been using all my life ain't enough for this here Columbia. I been breaking out a new set every morning." Jonathan returned his sour grin as Sally appeared shivering at the opening of the wagon. He sloshed to get the bag of pemmican and dole out breakfast. "Wished Dan'l was here with us, 'stead of up in that snow somewheres," murmured Sally. "Oh, Johnny, I can't feel easy about James. He's so Injun." "Funny thing is," Jonathan said carefully, "we still look alike, him and me. Same as when we was little fellers. 'Member that picture? Why, Johnny Keith, James don't look any more like that picture or like you than... I know. He wears braids and he's changed all right." Jonathan thought of the lean, wild grace of Jim's body, the eagle feather aslant above his scar-licked face. Still and all, Mr. Rutledge said he suspicioned who Jim was minute he pulled that letter out, 'cause we resembled. "Well, I can't see it," declared Sally. And I don't want to see it, what's more. He's a savage, eats dog meat and wipes his knives on his shirt. Can't even read. Lots of folks can't read, sis. Jonathan got up wearily, pulling the thongs tight over the remaining pemmican. What made him defend Jim? Everything she said was true. More than true. The way he threw that knife. And then there was the matter of that heathen little buckskin bundle Johnny'd spotted, tied to Jim's braid first night he'd come. Johnny knew what it was. He hoped Sally didn't. She'd disowned Jim completely. But then she didn't remember that the Jim he'd known when they were children together, hadn't been lonesome for him all these years, wanting him back. He shook off the mood irritably. Best we worry about Jim later. Right now we got plenty on our hands just staying alive. Before the murky dawn had given way to bleak daylight, they were casting off. The wind seemed to be falling off a little, of course, thought Jonathan grimly, since we got rapids ahead. Half of their fight had been against that wind, which seemed obstinately set on keeping them in the same place. One day they'd made it scarcely a mile in 8 long hours. But let the water grow white with hidden obstacles, let rapids and whirlpools loom up in their path, and the wind was sure to vanish, leaving them to race headlong over the swift current, fighting to control the raft's progress by thrusting with their poles at the rocks that jutted out of the swirling water like bared fangs. With the next smooth stretch, back would come the wind, and they'd be fighting just as hard to get moving at all. Sound like river rafting on the Grace? Since the first day, all of them had ceased to think of the river as a mere body of water, rushing through the natural causes to the sea. It was a monster, intent on their destruction, roaring with fury at their presence in his black-walled gorge, calling the rain to drench them and the snow to blind them, and the wind to madden them and the rapids to drown them. Every mile negotiated, every obstacle dodged, was a cheating of the giant. Along toward noon, Ned Rutledge, stationed at the foremost corner of the raft as the raft swung around a bend, let out a shout of alarm. "Watch it, Pa! This side! This side!" Through the veil of rain, Jonathan saw Rutledge splash across the pitching logs, sending up fans of water with every step. At the same moment, he glimpsed, on his own side, a dark shape looming under the surface just ahead. As the raft jarred up against whatever obstacle Ned had sighted, both Rutledges thrust hard, causing the whole clumsy raft to swing in a semicircle. "Take it easy," yelled Jonathan. He aimed his pole toward the looming shape ahead of himself and braced. An instant later, there was a grinding jolt that seemed to tear his arm from his socket. The logs under his feet tilted perilously, then bounded free, drenching him with icy spray. Before he had time to do more than catch his breath, the raft was careening forward again, leaping like a live thing, smacking down on the black, running current with bone-jarring force. From the Rutledge's wagon atop, under which the 4 women huddled through the long, chilling hours, he heard the familiar sounds of Maggie's cheering. In spite of his throbbing arm, he grinned. "You didn't get us that time," he told the giant. "Hungry?" Sally shouted in his ear a few moments later. He nodded without turning as the raft skimmed dangerously close to a jumble of wagon boughs. Soaked canvas and logs, ruined goods, the wreckage of just such a craft as their own. Lord Almighty, he grated, feeling his flesh crawl as they swept past. There's one didn't make it. "There's another near where we tied up last night," Sally said. "Well, that's only 2 so far. Think how many there was, starting off from the Dallas." He felt her steady herself against his shoulder, and she shoved pemmican into his mouth. "Wonder why we don't see none of the others," he mumbled. They had sighted only 3 other immigrant rafts in the whole 6 days. "Well, some's ahead of us and the rest is behind. We'll crowd up again at the Cascades, I reckon." Suddenly, her determined cheerfulness deserted her. "Oh, Johnny, I wonder if Dan'll... It must be powerful cold up yonder." Yes, Jonathan raised his eyes to the snow-swept heights, then looked away fast. They'll get through. They got to get through. By golly, if Jim don't get Dan'l back safe, I'll... Hush, said Sally fiercely. Open your mouth. Jonathan obeyed, getting almost as much rain in it as he did pemmican, and choking as a result. At the same moment, he heard a horse shout from Rutledge, and the raft lifted as if it meant to fly, then gave a heavy lurch and came down with a crash. Through the sheet of spray that shot out from under it, Jonathan caught a glimpse of Sally's white and desperate face as she fell headlong on the pitching logs, still clinging tight to the bag of pemmican. With an exclamation of pity, he bent to help her. Criminy, sis, any bones broke? No, get back to your pulling, Johnny. I'm all right. She got up. One hand pressed to her side. Dratted old river. Here, Johnny, the bag got wet, but I'll eat tonight. Go on in the shelter. You ain't safe here. It ain't fair. It's too rough for her, he thought incoherently. She had come mighty near to going overboard. But there was no time to nurse his fright, and no time to worry. The river was still tossing them about with malicious force, and fresh rapids boiled up ahead. Jonathan thrust hard and harder with the pole, his thoughts veering again to those white drifted slopes above, and the two who were up there somewhere in the snow and wind. The raft edged past a rocky little beach late that afternoon, and his heart leaped at the sight of a group of scrawny cattle, coats roughened with cold, haunched miserably in the wind. There was no sign of a mule, or a beautiful wild mare, or a small boy. It was some other emigrant's cattle. Johnny spotted the burly drover just as the whole scene vanished around the twist of a river. What were they doing down here at water's level? Was the high trail impassable after all? Oh, criminy, why did I ever let Dan'l go out of my sight? He thought. I never should have. Then even his fear faded in the weary confusion of rocks and drenching spray. The whole world narrowed itself finally to the ache of his shoulders and the wet, the cold, the next rock.